This is probably the best PTR patch notes that we have seen in probably forever, at least in the war within, when it comes to balancing buffs to classes that have been neglected for so long. Yes, the ones you might be thinking about, and nerfs to the ones that are just pushing everybody to the side. Yes, the ones that you might be thinking about. Hello there, I'm Flame for Marcelian Online, and we will be talking about all of the newest buffs and nerfs and tuning done to all of the classes specs in the 11.2 PTR coming up in Season 3. So let's not waste too much time and hop right into it, starting as always with the Death Knight. For the hero talents, Rider of the Apocalypse, Unholy has been addressed. The 2-set bonus from the tier now correctly increases the damage of Undeath by 20%. So just a bunch of fixes, I suppose. Brittle now affects Undeath damage. Unholy Assault now affects Undeath damage. The War effect of Rune of the Apocalypse now affects Undeath damage. So essentially, Rider of the Apocalypse tier set gives you this Undeath damage from White Mane, as far as I understand it, and this is a source of your damage. And for the last couple of weeks, what they've done is just makes this source of damage be affected by a lot of the things in the Unholy kit, which is what you're seeing right now. This is just to make the tier set strong, and hopefully, from all intents and purposes, this is actually starting to happen, make Rider of the Apocalypse a valid choice in your playstyle, not just Sand Lane. And speaking of Sand Lane, generic changes. The 2-set bonus now grants 0.5% mastery per stack of Essence of the Blood Queen. Previously was 0.8, so nerfed, once again to keep them in tune. And the 4-set bonus, Infliction of Sorrow, deals 50% increased damage, and Vampiric Strike increases the damage of your Ghoul Dancing Rune weapon by 20% for 8 seconds. Multiple applications may overlap, and it was 10% before for 6 seconds. So essentially they've changed some powers from the 2-set to the 4-set from what I understand. Frost Death Knight has been nerfed. All ability damage reduced by 12%. If we're going to be talking about aura nerfs for a specific spec, this is the biggest that I remember seeing ever. 12% in one go is big, and need I remind you, your boy called it. I called it 2 weeks ago. Breath of Sindragosa duration is now extended by 0.8 seconds when consuming Killing Machine or Rhyme effects, and Breath of Sindragosa damage has been increased by 20%. Previously, over the course of a Mythic Plus dungeon, since this is where you would be doing most of the testing, I believe, Breath of Sindragosa was pretty low in your damage profile, all things considered, while Frost Scythe was the best. Now, Breath of Sindragosa is not active for a lot of the time, so that wouldn't have been too surprising. However, they do seem to want to pack more punch into Breath of Sindragosa, which kind of feels like you might be forced to play it as opposed to it being a choice. Hopefully that doesn't become the case. Let's move on. Fixed an issue with Unholy, causing Commander of the Dead to not affect the ghouls summoned from Apocalypse, so if you ever saw Unholy not doing enough damage, it's gonna be fixed if you're running Commander of the Dead. Moving on to Druid. For the hero talent saloons chosen, the Guardian 2-set bonus effectiveness of Star Surges cast by the set is increased to 160%. Previously was 65%. Do you think this is a big number? Because this is a big number. The set was just not performing properly, so there you go. Keeper of the Grove for balance. The 4-set bonus now stores 3% of the damage done, and its maximum storage has been reduced by 50%. While the 4-set bonus duration is now 15 seconds, previously was 45 seconds. I don't know if these are bigger nerfs or if the Frost Death Knight has bigger nerfs. However, Balance Druid was just absolutely destroying everything on the PTR. We haven't had the chance to test it ourselves, but everything that we've seen on the internet just makes it seem freaking ridiculous. Feral. Saberjaw's bonus to extra ferocious bite damage has been increased to 60 and 120% respectively, up from 40 to 80%. This does not affect PvP, and this is great news. What this talent does, and I'm not sure if a lot of Ferals have been using this so far, is just to increase your pure single target damage, since this does just make your Ferocious Bite do more damage when you consume it over 50 energy, further increasing the single target potential of Feral, making it a much better raid spec as an opposition to Balance Druid, who is usually the better AoE spec. For Evoker, the Flame Shaper Essence Bomb healing reduced to 250% spell power, previously was 500, so this has been halved. Reverted a change to Consume Flame that was intended to fix a timing issue with calculating Inner Flame's healing bonus. This was causing Dream Breath to lose any snapshotted healing benefits from spells like Call of Ysera, and fixed an issue where Consume Flame would not gain the benefit of Scorching Embers if there were less than 2 seconds remaining on Fire Breath. Devastation has Essence Bomb damage increased by 33%, and Inner Flame increases damage over time by 15% per stack, down from 25%. And for the Scale Commander, the 2-set bonus, Command Squadron from the set bonus will now be limited to casting up to 8 Pyres. Their Pyre damage has also been increased by 25%. Pyres can once again be cast behind you, kind of reverting what they've done last week when it came to Pyres, since they wanted to eliminate any potential gimmicky playstyle with Deep Breath or Breath of Yawns in this case. I don't know if this was part of it, but it's being reversed right now. All in all, it's good to see it Devastation buffs, because we don't get to see Devastation almost at all, almost ever, outside of some high-end raids. But listen, I digress. Preservation, Temporal Anomaly absorption increased to 230%. Absorption beyond 5 targets now diminishes even more sharply. And we have developer notes. We would like Temporal Anomaly to be a more effective tool for Preservation Evokers in dungeons to prevent damage to the group. To prevent it from scaling too well in raids, the absorption will now very quickly diminish when reaching additional targets beyond 5. It's been a while since I've played Preservation in raids. However, this is a good change for dungeons. However, in raids it becomes incredibly unreliable. If I recall correctly, Temporal Anomaly doesn't really have a controlled way of being applied to targets that you would wish to be, for it to be applied on, considering that it's a projectile that fires in a line and whoever gets hit, I suppose. But it's better than nothing, I guess, and absorbs are always welcome if we're ever going to be talking about a situation where overhealing might be a problem. Hunter, Dark Ranger, Bleak Powder now correctly scales with Mastery, Sniper Training, and Mastery, Master of Beasts. Dark Ranger buffs are always welcome because Pack Leader and Sentinel are boring. Beast Mastery, all damage dealt reduced by 3%. I think this should have been bigger. And Marksmanship, all damage dealt reduced by 10%. Big hits on the range hunters. Mage, and this is probably the most divisive changes that we've had so far. We have developer notes first. Many mage tier bonuses were substantially overtuned despite mage's generally average performance. We're significantly reducing the power of outlier tier sets and moving some power into the spec and hero talent kits to compensate. We'll continue to monitor the impact of this tuning and adjust as necessary. Before I go into this, just recently tested mage myself, and Arcane is kind of bonkers, but fire was just atrocious in the overall performance. So I hope that they will double down on this as well and buff the baseline spec a little bit more. It's always good to see if the baseline spec does well and not be too reliant on a particular tier set. Frostfire, Fire Mage, the 2-set bonus Comet Storm, Frostfire Burst, and Frostfire Bolt Ignite application is reduced to 50% effectiveness, was 100%. I think it was even higher before. Frostfire Bolt damage increased, reduced to 5%, previously was 10%. Frostfire Burst, Ice Nova, and Comet Storm damage bonus reduced to 10%, previously was 20%. The 4-set bonus Glacial Spike damage reduced by 40%. And for Frost, the 4-set bonus Pyroblast damage reduced by 50%. We're gonna get soon to the rest of it. Spellslinger, for Arcane, the 2-set bonus Arcane Blast now grants 1 Arcane Harmony stack, previously was 2, and Splinter chance to grant Arcane Harmony reduced to 25%, previously was 100%. This essentially created a very fun but kind of degenerate gameplay with Arcane, where you would just fire up max Arcane Intuition barrages back to back, considering that once you get to 20, you would generate Intuition and you would just fire barrages. On one hand, that gameplay loop was incredibly fun. On the other hand, if you just fire infinite barrages, they cannot do that much damage on their own, since you just fire so many of them, so they would have had to be nerfed physically, and that would have just probably felt bad. So the fact that the tier set was so overpowered and getting nerfed is probably for the best. And to top it off, Arcane Splinter damage has been increased by 30%. This is a pretty big buff. Now, it's very hard to put it side by side with the nerf to the 2 set, since I don't know if we have the calculations yet. We will need to do more PTR testing with Arcane as well. And as far as we understand it, the mage community is still doing the math on this to see if it's any good. The buff to Splinter is big. The nerf to tier set is big as well. So maybe in the end, it will all balance out. For Frost Mage and Spellslinger, the 2 set bonus Ice Lance, chance to grant Cold Front was reduced to 50%, previously was 100, and Splinter chance to grant Cold Front reduced to 15%, previously was 20%. For Sun Fury Arcane, the 4 set bonus Lesser Time Warp now grants 20% haste, previously was 25%. And for Fire, the 4 set bonus Lesser Time Warp now grants 12% haste, previously was 25%, so much bigger nerf for Fire. And Hypothermia extension amount reduced to 0.25 seconds, previously was 0.5 seconds. Spell damage bonus reduced to 10%, previously was 20%. Once again, I've tested both Sun Fury and Frostfire for Fire. The performance is incredibly lackluster compared to the other DPSers, so let's see what they do to compensate this. Arcane, all damage dealt increased by 3%, and you might be looking at this and thinking, why does Arcane need a buff? I mean, we just talked about it. The tier set was pretty heavily nerfed, and the tier set was pretty much... If you look at the damage profile of Arcane, you will see Arcane Barrage being about, I don't know, 70 to 80% of your damage in AoE. That is crazy. So it's good that they did this. For Fire, all damage dealt increased by 3%. That's normally on itself not enough. Pyroblast damage increased by 30%, and Flame Strike damage increased by 30%. This is actually very good to see. These are pretty big buffs to some of the biggest hitters on Fire. And need I remind you that sure, increasing the damage of these direct spells is big, but they also contribute to Ignite. So this inevitably increases the Ignite damage that you do. That spreads in AoE, whether you do it with Pyroblast or Flame Strike. So this is good to see. Once again, I hope this is enough to bring Fire back, because Fire was just doing terrible. And for Frost, all damage dealt increased by 10%. This is, in terms of aura buffs, still probably one of the biggest ones that we've seen. And I think probably Frost Mage is the winner in terms of raw damage gain. But once again, Frost was kind of like whatever. So in the end, this doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be too impactful. We have a fat developer notes for Monk. Our goals for the Mystic Touch buff. All right. I remember when, before I go this, remember when Mystic Touch was buffed 8%? And once again, your boy here called it out. It's not going to last. And the community went into an uproar. We didn't really talk about it too much on the channel. I was pretty sure it was going to go down. But that doesn't matter. What the dev notes said is our goals for the Mystic Touch buff were to better equalize it in raid to other similar raid buffs and to give a small nudge to physical comps in M+. We hear the community concerns about this change and how it might affect the viability of physical damage dealers. And because of these concerns, we will be reverting the buff. This change will not be in the build data mine, but will be applied to the PTR later this week. Thank you for your continued feedback. Mystic Touch now increases physical damage taken by 5%. Previously was 8%. The problem necessarily isn't that the Mystic Touch was a weak buff. The problem is just overall with class design. But then again, maybe this is why it was buffed in general, is because the physical damage contribution spread across the entire DPS pool was way less than any magical contribution. So obviously a bigger increase in buffing that physical damage was probably more in line with stuff like Chaos Brand and potentially Arcane Intellect. The thing is, until this changes where melee DPSers that usually do physical damage can actually just do physical damage, the Mystic Touch will always be like a hit and miss. It will never have the same amount of value if there's only like what? Outlaw, Beast Mastery, Arms Warrior, maybe Fury Warrior if you play Slayer, because if you play Mountain Thane, you do nature damage with Thunderclap, or they change the damage to physical, and also physical damage gets negated by armor, which is not necessarily true for magical damage. And Monk does most of its damage also in physical damage, but that's about it. We have about 20 more specs that just incorporate magic damage in their kit. You have Assassination Rogue, which does nature damage and it's poisons. You have Subtlety Rogue, which does shadow damage with most of its big hitters, and some of the talents that has it increased. Marksmanship that does fire damage with explosive shot, and nature or arcane damage with sentinel. Survival Hunter also giga fire damage with all of the bombs. And need I continue with the rest? It's just very skewed. Paladin, The Lightsmith hero talents has been addressed. Fix an issue where Hammer and Anvil, when triggered via Hammer of the Righteous or Blessed Hammer or Crusader Strike, was not using the correct value. I don't know if this is bigger or lower. Hammer and Anvil can no longer trigger more than once from a single Blessed Hammer cast, because Pro Paladins were cracking. When multiple Paladins are in a group, Lesser Weapon and Lesser Bulwark should now stack with those cast by other Paladins. Lesser Weapon and Lesser Bulwark should now be able to be cast on the casting Paladin, all right? And Retribution. Now, if you weren't aware, Retribution damage is doing record low DPS on the PTR right now, and Marcelian and I were actually talking about it in a video that was supposed to go live today, but it's probably gonna go live on Sunday, and if you hear Marcelian talk about the damage of red, this is what he was referring to, but now we actually have this buffed. Templar's Verdict damage has been increased by 10%, Divine Arbiter damage increased by 25%, Judgment damage increased by 30%, Blade of Justice damage increased by 15%, Crusading Strikes damage increased by 30%, High Lord's Judgment damage increased by 30%. Wrathful Descent now deals 100% of the Imperium damage critical strikes to nearby enemies. Previously it was 125%, so this is probably a nerf to Templar. And Imperium Hammer damage increased by 10%, or maybe they're just switching around where the damage is coming from. Hammer of Light primary target damage increased by 5% and fixed an issue causing Divine Toll Judgments to deal 80% increased damage instead of 100%. I believe that most of these issues will affect reds on single targets, since this is purely single target, especially Divine Arbiter. Personally, I'm a little bit sad that Crusading Strikes was buffed, but Templar Strikes was kind of not. I don't know if Templar Strikes was just overperforming Crusading Strikes, but once again, it just skews or at least shows the bias of the design, where they just want red to have simple builds, the passive builds be way stronger than the active builds. Something that I guess personally I'm not a big fan of. But moving on to Priest. Voidweaver, Discipline, the 2-set bonus now increases Void Blast damage by 30%, previously was 40%, and the 4-set bonus now increases Mind Blast damage by up to 300%, previously was 200%. They did talk about tier sets being a bit too strong, but that was mostly for Mage. However, Shadow Priest Voidweaver tier set was doing Giga Void Blast damage. I would imagine Discipline the same, because for Shadow, also the same change with a 2-set bonus that has Void Blast damage increased by 30% and not 40%. And the 4-set bonus now increases Void Torrents damage by up to 60%, was 200% before, and it causes Void Blast to increase Entropic Rift's damage by an additional 10%, previously was 20%. This is a big nerf on the tier set for Shadow at the very least. But a very good change, I believe. We haven't seen the numbers just yet, but for Shadow, Subservient Shadows now also increases the damage of shadowy apparitions. Subservient Shadows is a new talent that comes in the new patch with Shadow. If you haven't seen our rework video, that increases all pet damage that you do by, I think it was 12% last I checked it, and this affects stuff like the little shadowy beasts, the thing from beyond, the now shadowy apparitions, because myself included, priests have asked for shadowy apparitions builds to come back because they were very fun and very visually pleasing, and seeing this is very good. I don't know if 12% is enough to bring shadowy apparitions back from the dead, but the fact that they are including them in this gives me big hope for the particular build. And Rogue, you thought Rogues were forgotten, because they freaking were. We're seeing some changes. Assassination, Crimson Tempest damage reduced by 9%. But hold on. Envenom damage increased by 4%. Garrote damage increased by 13%. Rupture damage increased by 8%. Ambush damage increased by 7%. Mutilate damage increased by 11%. And melee auto attack damage, I don't know why this is here, increased by 8%. So we have a lot of single target damage and some inevitable AoE damage as well. Being buffed for Assassination, which was doing actually really good damage on the PTR, at least in dungeons. So once again, I believe that this is probably to address raid performance, seeing as how Crimson Tempest has been nerfed to probably not turn Assassination into the new Frost Decay. Outlaw, all damage increased by 10%. I scratch it or take it back. Frost Mage isn't the only one that's getting a big fat aura buff, and Outlaw is part of it. However, Blade Flurry now deals 45% of single target damage to nearby enemies, previously was 50%. I don't necessarily mind this change to Outlaw. If anything, I would go probably harder. Maybe increase the single target even more and make Blood Flurry transfer less damage so that Outlaw can have way better priority damage at the expense of a little bit of AoE, since this is usually what M+ or AoE situations demand way more than anything else. Maybe that can be added as a talent, but at least if it's base kit, still good enough. Subtlety, black powder damage increased by 11%. Oh my god, this is probably still not enough, but it's good to see because for the last 2 years, black powder has become a meme in terms of the damage performance. But it's good to see that it's been buffed. And for Trickster, Nimble Flurry now deals 65% of listed ability damage to nearby enemies. Previously was 60%. This is a very good change to this, and I'll tell you why. Currently, as it stands in Season 2, if you're playing Subtlety, you want to use black powder at, I don't know, it depends on certain conditions, but either 5, 7, or 8 targets, depending on what's going on with your procs. Because Nimble Flurry is normally transferring your single target damage into AoE, because Nimble Flurry is basically Blade Flurry from Outlaw, but applies to Subtlety. So it essentially incentivizes you to not have to press black powder, because you can just press Eviscerate and it would deal damage to all the targets. And because of this, black powder was pushed into your rotation to only be usable in, I think, in 8+ target scenarios, which were very rare. But if you buff black powder, it will be brought down. It will be a little bit harder because 11% isn't enough to fully replace Eviscerate in AoE. But having Nimble Flurry buff makes it seem so that even if you do buff black powder, you might still want to use Eviscerate in single target in AoE so that you can spread the damage with Nimble Flurry, I would imagine. I don't know how big these numbers are, but all in all, if this just makes Subtlety do more damage, period, that's great. Shaman, slight changes for the Stormbringer enhancement. Tempest now deals 50% of the primary target damage to enemies within 8 yards. Previously was 65, so a nerf to enhancement. And we're getting to Warlock. Diabolist, for the hero talents first. The 2-set bonus has been updated. Damage dealt by your demonic oculi is increased by 100%. This change does not affect PvP combat. Wicked Cleave damage increased by 50%, also not affecting PvP combat. Chaos Salvo damage increased by 50%. Fellseeker damage increased by 50%. Ruination damage increased by 50%, not in PvP though. Infernal Bolt damage increased by 55%. Flames of Zoroth now increases demon and fire damage dealt by 4%, previously was 2%. Big buffs Diabolist. And for Hellcaller, Affliction, Wither periodic damage increased by 15%. Blackened Soul damage increased by 30%. Zalen's Ferocity now increases fire damage by 6%, previously was 2%. And Zalen's Cruelty now increases shadow damage by 6%, previously was also 2%. And for Destruction, Wither periodic damage increased by only 10% this time. Blackened Soul by 20%. Zalen's Ferocity increases damage dealt by fire damage to 8%, previously was 4%, and Zalen's Cruelty increases shadow damage dealt by 8%, previously was 4%. So kind of shifting the power and the hero talents there a little bit. Soul Harvester, the 2-set bonus for Affliction, has been updated. Damage dealt by a rampaging demonic soul is increased by 65%. Wicked Reaping damage increased by 75%. Demonic Soul damage increased by 55%. Soul Anathema damage increased by 40%. And for Demonology, fixed an issue with the Mana Forge 2-set bonus where Soul Swipe was benefiting twice from Mastery, and for the 2-set bonus again, did not benefit from Shadow Touched. And last but not least, Warrior. Before we go into the settings, similar to Marcelian's points on Red, I had some points on the Warrior as well that you probably saw on stream, twitch.tv/MarcelianOnline, but also you will see in a future video that we have that Blade Storm damage was just pitiful, and it has been pitiful for a very long time. So what we're getting is Arms Blade Storm damage increased by 15%. That's probably not enough to put Slayer above Colossus in AoE in any case. I don't even know if it will make it competitive, but it's good to have this addressed, period, because Blade Storm should be one of the abilities that hits the hardest in AoE for Warrior specs. I argue that it should be one of the abilities that hits the hardest in AoE, period, in the game per cast. Not overall DPS, but per cast, because it's Blade Storm. But it has just been kind of like an enabler and user of passive damage. For Fury though, oh boy, Blade Storm damage increased by 15%. Whirlwind damage increased by 10%. Improved Whirlwind causes your single target attacks to deal 65% of the damage to up to 4 nearby enemies. Previously was 55%. And we have developer notes. Fury has been struggling to keep up in sustained AoE combat. These changes are aimed to bolstering Fury in these situations. This is something that we have 100% seen happen in the last couple of patches. It seemed like it's happening a little bit too late, but we're glad to see Fury buffs because Fury was down bad this season, last season, future season. I don't know what's going on, but probably Fury might need a little bit more than this, but this is the first version of the buffs. We're gonna see more and more come up in the next couple of weeks, I hope, because we do have 2 more weeks until the patch launches, so we're nearly there. We need to get these sorted out ASAP. And before you go, make sure you check our Monk video as to why Monk would be the best class in the game, even if Mystic Touch was nerfed, because Monk is not just about Mystic Touch. And I'm of course talking about Windwalker, Brewmaster, and Mistweaver all in one video right here.